They cut me out of the will, said I wasn't real family. But the second I inherited $3 million, guess who came crawling back, begging, demanding, even threatening? Then my own mother sued me. But wait, it gets worse. Way worse. You won't believe what they tried next, just to get their hands on my money. Left out of the will by my mom and stepdad because, apparently, I didn't count as real family. Funny how that changed the moment I inherited $3 million. Now suddenly they're all about reconnecting. But let's rewind a bit and start from where it all began. I was 15 when everything in my life flipped upside down. That's when my mom decided to remarry a guy who came with baggage of his own, including a teenage son from his first marriage. The kid was 17, a few years older than me, and let's just say we didn't exactly become fast friends. They hadn't even finished signing the marriage papers before the tension started creeping in. At first, it was just minor stuff, the kind of friction you expect when strangers are shoved under the same roof and told to act like family. He'd leave his dirty plates stacked in the sink like they were going to magically disappear, and somehow I'd be the one catching heat for the mess in the kitchen. My shampoo would vanish way faster than usual, and lo and behold, my new stepbrother would be walking around with hair that smelled suspiciously like my favorite product. It wasn't just the annoying things he did, it was the way my stepdad always handled it. The man had this knack for blaming me no matter what was going on. Something out of place? Must have been me. And my mom? She wasn't much help. She was so wrapped up in making this new family picture perfect that she'd turn a blind eye to the obvious. She'd smooth things over, always finding some excuse for why her new stepson could do no wrong. Then, a year into this chaotic new setup, Mom and my stepdad made a big announcement: they were having a baby. And that's when the whole dynamic took a nosedive. Suddenly, everything revolved around the new arrival. The house needed to be rearranged, and surprise, surprise, my bedroom was the one chosen to become the nursery. So I got booted into the cramped guest room. Barely enough space for my things, and just like that, the message was clear: I was being pushed down the totem pole. As my little half-brother got older, it was obvious he was the golden boy. Meanwhile, my stepbrother, who was already spoiled beyond reason, took that as his cue to double down on being a pain. He dropped out of college and moved back in, dragging chaos behind him. Late-night parties, sketchy friends always in and out, our house turned into a circus. And every complaint I made? Brushed off with a shrug from my stepdad or a sad little smile from my mom, like they were helpless. I started spending more time at my friends' places. It was the only way I could feel remotely normal. School became my lifeline. I joined every club I could, stayed late for projects, signed up for extra classes, anything to avoid going home before I absolutely had to. It wasn't about teenage rebellion. It was survival, plain and simple. Home felt like a minefield. I was constantly tiptoeing around, waiting for the next explosion. There's one evening I still remember clear as day. I'd stayed late working on a group project at school, and when I finally got back, the house was eerily quiet. There was a note stuck to the fridge. They'd all gone out for dinner. A family dinner. No one had mentioned it to me. That little note hit harder than I expected. Like I only existed when there was something to blame me for. Not long after I turned 18, I hit my breaking point. I'd been working part-time and saving up what I could, despite my stepdad grumbling about how the job was distracting me from school, which really just meant he didn't like that I wasn't around to take the heat anymore. Then one day, I came home to find my room wrecked. Stepbrother had thrown another one of his parties while the folks were out, and my room? Totally trashed. Beer stains on my schoolwork, a smashed lamp, my stuff rifled through like it didn't matter. The next morning, I brought it up at breakfast, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd be taken seriously. But stepdad? Ice cold. Told me I should have taken better care of my things. Mom just sighed and gave me her usual line about how family needs to stick together and let things go. But I was done letting things slide. It felt like every move I made got picked apart, not out of love or concern, but like they were just waiting for me to mess up. Meanwhile, my stepbrother, who had perfected the art of doing nothing, always got a free pass. And my little half-brother? He was just a kid, yeah, but the way they coddled him made it crystal clear who the real priorities were. I remember this one time I was working on a big science project I was actually excited about. I needed space, some peace and quiet, but good luck finding that at home. I tried to carve out a little corner of the living room to work in, but it was like trying to build a sandcastle in the middle of a storm. My stepbrother would crank up his music, my little brother would be tearing through the house yelling, and my stepdad? He kept telling me to move my stuff. "You're taking up too much space, or your project's a mess," he'd say. I was trying to focus on something important, something that mattered to me, but I felt like I was fighting the wind. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up everything and headed to a friend's house. Her family was kind, always welcoming. They let me spread out my work on their dining room table, and for the first time in ages I felt like I could actually think. My friend noticed the change in me right away. She could see the tension drop off the second I walked through their door. One day, she looked at me and said, "You're always welcome here." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. It made me realize just how off things were at home. A house is supposed to be your safe space, not a place you're constantly running from. So I started picking up more shifts at work. If I wasn't at school or crashing at a friend's, I was at my job. Not just for the paycheck, but because being out of that house meant I could finally breathe. Of course, stepdad hated it. Kept going off about how the job was ruining my education. But I knew the real reason. He didn't like that I wasn't around for him to boss around and blame anymore. The more I saved, the more the idea of moving out started to feel real. I knew they wouldn't take it well, especially my mom. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew it was the only way I'd ever get my life back. Eventually, the day came. I found a tiny apartment close enough to college and cheap enough to afford. I sat them both down, heart pounding, trying not to let my voice shake. "I'm moving out," I told them. And just like that, the room went dead silent. The silence in the room was thick, you could practically feel it pressing down. No one said a word at first, but the tension? You could slice it with a knife. My stepdad was the one who finally broke it. "So you think you're ready to live on your own at your age?" he said, practically scoffing. My mom didn't say anything at first. She just glanced between us, her face a blank slate. I did my best to hold my ground. "I do," I told him, trying to sound more sure of myself than I actually felt inside. "I need my own space. I've saved enough to make it work." What followed wasn't a calm conversation. It turned into a full-blown argument. The kind where voices rise and words are thrown like darts. They accused me of being ungrateful, of running away from my responsibilities. My stepdad really laid it on thick, trying to guilt me about my little brother. "He looks up to you," he said, like that alone should have been enough reason for me to keep living in a house that was slowly draining me. But I didn't budge. This wasn't about avoiding chores or trying to be rebellious. I needed out for my own mental and emotional survival. Each box I packed over the next few days felt like I was stacking bricks around myself, building a safe space nobody could invade. Then came moving day. I was in the middle of organizing the last of my stuff when my mom showed up in my room. I braced myself, expecting another round of pleading or arguments, but instead she helped me pack. We didn't talk much. When we did, it was all surface level. "Do you need more boxes?" she asked. "I've got some old kitchenware if you want it." We danced around the real conversation, tiptoeing around everything we weren't saying. Like if we avoided the heavy stuff, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. Later that day, I closed the door to my new apartment for the first time. I stood there, surrounded by boxes, staring at my unfamiliar new world. Relief washed over me, followed closely by sadness, then excitement and fear. I was on my own. For real this time. And yeah, it was scary, but it was also the most freeing thing I'd ever done. The first few nights were rough. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I even caught myself missing the chaos I'd worked so hard to escape from. Okay, maybe miss isn't the right word. I noticed the absence, I guess. But as the days rolled into weeks, I found myself settling in. I began to appreciate the stillness, the calm. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I felt like it, and come and go without someone breathing down my neck. I started feeling like I was meeting a version of myself I hadn't known before, the one that didn't have to shrink just to keep the peace. Life developed a rhythm. College, work, errands, it was the most peace I'd had in years. My relationship with my mom and stepdad stayed strained, but manageable. Distance helped. Then, out of the blue, everything shifted again. My stepdad had a health scare. It wasn't fatal, but it shook them up enough to make him start thinking about the future, especially his will. I didn't hear it from him directly, of course. Mom called me one evening, sounding more serious than usual. "Your stepdad's been going over his will," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. "He just wants to make sure everything's squared away." I gave a neutral okay, not really sure where she was heading with this. Then came the real reason for the call. She paused for a moment before saying, "He's decided to include your stepbrother and your half-brother, but not you. He says it makes more sense since they're his biological children." There it was. The gut punch. I didn't expect much, but hearing it spelled out like that still stung. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about what it meant. About how, after all the years I'd spent trying to belong, they were still drawing lines that excluded me. "I see," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Thanks for letting me know." Mom must have picked up on the pain I was trying to hide because she quickly added, "It's just legal stuff. It doesn't change how we feel about you." "Right," I replied, already disengaging. We shifted the conversation to lighter topics, but the damage had been done. That night, I laid in bed staring up at the ceiling, drowning in that old familiar feeling like no matter what I did, I'd never truly be part of their world. The days that followed were heavy. I kept going over that phone call in my mind. Part of me wanted to confront him, to ask why he felt I didn't deserve to be included. But another part of me didn't see the point. Why argue over being left out when I'd never been truly let in to begin with? I started pulling away even more. Skipped visits. Let texts go unanswered. It wasn't to be spiteful, it was just self-preservation. Then came the moment that really flipped the switch for me. No drama, no screaming. Just a quiet realization. I was sitting at a little cafe, working on a term paper when I overheard a group at the next table. They were laughing, sharing stories about their families, normal stuff. Small fights, big laughs, shared memories. And it hit me hard. I didn't have that. I'd never really had it. That moment shifted something inside me. I stopped mourning the inheritance, the title of family member I'd never really been granted. It wasn't about a will. It was about feeling valued. Feeling seen. So I made a decision. I stopped trying to earn love from people who only saw me when it was convenient. I poured my energy into the people who had always shown up, my friends, my professors, co-workers who had become my support system. Little by little, the sting of being cut out faded. Not entirely. There were still rough patches, especially during holidays when my stepbrother and half-brother got all the spotlight. But I learned to let go of the things I couldn't control. Then came the ultimate test. My stepdad recovered. Life went back to normal for them and I got an invite to a family dinner, kind of a yay, he's better celebration. I went more out of courtesy than desire. And yep, it was just as awkward as I expected. My stepdad gave an update on his health. Everyone fawned over my half-brother's school accomplishments. My stepbrother bragged about landing some job. I sat there, mostly quiet. Clearly the outsider. But this time, it didn't cut as deep. I'd made peace with where I stood in their world. I wasn't part of the core unit and that was okay because outside that house, I had people who saw me for who I really was, not for what I could offer or what name I carried. After dinner, I excused myself early, mumbling something about needing to be up early the next day. On the drive back, I felt something unexpected, light. Like a weight I'd carried for years had finally loosened its grip. For the first time in a long time. I felt okay. Genuinely okay. I had come to terms with my reality, weathered the emotional storms, and somehow made it through stronger and more grounded than I'd ever been. If there's one thing life loves to do though, it's hit you with curveballs just when you think you've finally found your footing. I'd settled into my routine, comfortable, independent, and accepting that my family ties were, at best, distant and strained. Then one random afternoon I got a phone call that flipped everything on its head. It was a lawyer. I didn't recognize the name or number and his voice was formal, even a little apologetic. He asked if I had a moment to talk about the estate of my grandaunt, my dad's aunt, to be exact. Honestly, I had to dig through some distant childhood memories to even remember who she was. She wasn't someone I had a close relationship with. One of those relatives that gets mentioned in family stories but rarely seen in real life. I recalled that she never had kids of her own and had helped raise my dad when he was younger, but that was about it. I'm calling to inform you that your grandaunt recently passed away, the lawyer said gently, and she left her entire estate to you. I sat there stunned. My mind scrambled to keep up. I wasn't sure what to feel, a sadness that she had passed, guilt that I hadn't known her better, confusion about why she chose me, and a creeping weight of responsibility for what was coming next. The lawyer explained that she'd been financially savvy throughout her life and had accumulated a sizable estate. Among her assets was a trust fund, now mine, worth about $3 million. Just like that, everything changed. I hung up the phone and just sat in silence, trying to wrap my head around what I just heard. Why me? We weren't close. Sure, I'd visited her a few times, but those visits felt more like checking in on an aging relative than building any real connection. Still, maybe she saw something in me. Maybe she recognized the independence, the resilience, and the grit it had taken me to carve out my own path. Maybe, in her own way, she was reaching back to honor a connection that others had long ignored. The next few days were a blur, meetings with the attorney, paperwork, signatures, and conversations about the logistics of handling an inheritance of that size. It wasn't just money. She'd left behind properties, investment accounts, and a few personal items that carried sentimental weight. One of them was a letter. In it, she explained her decision. She wrote that she'd always admired my determination and self-reliance, that I reminded her of herself when she was young. It was heartfelt and validating in a way I hadn't known I needed. Armed with this unexpected gift, I made some big changes. The first was buying a house. Not a mansion or anything flashy, just a solid, modest home I could truly call mine. It marked a new chapter for me, one where I wasn't struggling to get by, but finally had room to breathe. I also invested in a small rental property, thinking ahead, wanting to build something that could grow over time. The rest I put into smart investments and savings with the help of a financial advisor. I didn't want to waste this opportunity. I wanted to honor it. But as I quickly learned, money doesn't just change your life, it changes how people treat you. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the inheritance. Honestly, I just wanted to avoid the drama I knew would come with it. But secrets have a way of slipping out, and this one didn't stay quiet for long. It started with a cousin who worked in some legal-adjacent job. He must have caught wind of it through the grapevine, and before I knew it, word had reached my mom. And once she knew, the dominoes fell fast. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First came the calls from Mom. Then my stepdad. Then my stepbrother. Then relatives I hadn't seen or spoken to in years. Each one of them seemed to have a reason they desperately needed help. Times are tough, they'd say. Or, you know how your stepdad's health has been. As if that justified them showing up only now with their hands out. It didn't take long before the polite requests turned into straight-up demands. You owe us, some implied. Family helps family, others said, conveniently forgetting how little family had meant when I needed them most. It felt like I was surrounded by vultures. No one called to say congratulations or even ask how I was doing. It was all about the money. At one point, I started second-guessing myself. Was I being selfish for keeping the inheritance to myself? Was I really as cold and ungrateful as they were accusing me of? But then I remembered the years I spent being treated like a stranger in my own home. All the nights I worked late, scraping together enough for school and rent while they looked the other way. No one helped me then. No one offered support when I was drowning. I did it on my own. This inheritance? It was mine. Not just legally, but morally. I'd earned my peace, and I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation chip away at it. Eventually, my mom asked me straight out, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you think to share this with us?" That was the moment I drew the line. I told her, calmly but firmly, that the distance between us had never just been about where we lived, it was about how I'd been treated. For years, I was reminded, in 1,000 little ways, that I wasn't really one of them. And now that I had something they wanted, they were suddenly remembering my name. "This is my life," I said. "And I have to live it the way I see fit. I'm sorry if that's hard to hear, but I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself." Predictably, she didn't take it well. Neither did the others. I was called selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted. But I didn't waver. Over time, the calls came less often. The messages slowed, then stopped altogether. They realized I wasn't giving in. It was a painful but eye-opening lesson in who really stood by me and who only saw me as a resource. Real family isn't defined by blood or legal ties. It's the people who support you, who show up when it counts, without keeping score. Those were the relationships I chose to invest in. Friends who became chosen family. Mentors who believed in me. Coworkers who respected me. And the inheritance? That became more than just a financial blessing. It was a turning point. A final, powerful gift from a woman I wish I'd gotten to know better. She gave me more than money. She gave me clarity and the strength to stand tall, alone if I had to. At first, I thought receiving that kind of money would feel like winning the lottery. But as soon as the news spread, it didn't feel like a gift anymore, it felt like I was wearing a target. The minute people heard I was suddenly sitting on a few $1 million, the tone shifted. What started as subtle hints turned into bold requests. Then came the guilt-tripping. And when I didn't cave, the anger, the accusations. It wasn't just my immediate family. Distant relatives, people I hadn't spoken to since I was a teenager, started popping out of nowhere, suddenly very interested in catching up. I got messages that started out with, "So sorry to hear about your grandaunt," and quickly moved on to, "By the way, I could really use some help with rent," or, "If you could float me a loan, just until I'm back on my feet." It was like everyone had rehearsed the same sad script. And then came the hardest call of them all, my stepdad. He'd never exactly been warm, but this time his voice was colder than ever, sharp, calculated, like he was reading from a script soaked in guilt. "You know, we've always considered you a part of this family," he said, his tone sugar-coated but stale. "It's only right that you think of your brothers during this difficult time." That line struck a nerve. "My brothers haven't considered me family unless they needed something," I fired back, the words coming out sharper than I intended, but also more honest than I'd ever been with him. He didn't expect that. I could hear the surprise in his silence before he responded. "That's a harsh way to put it," he said, trying to stay composed. But he was rattled. He'd never heard me talk like that before. See, I'd spent most of my life as the quiet one. The compliant stepkid. the one who kept his head down to keep the peace. But not this time. The conversation spiraled fast. He accused me of being selfish. I reminded him of all the times I was left out, dismissed, made to feel like a stranger in the only home I had. Neither of us held back, and by the end, it was clear we'd crossed a line. There was no going back to pretending things were okay. Then my mom tried to step in. Tried to mediate, which really meant take his side. She showed up at my house unannounced, armed with a practiced smile and a guilt trip in her back pocket. "It's what families do," she said, nudging the idea of me sharing the inheritance like it was just a little favor. "Families support each other," I said, trying to keep my cool. "When have you ever supported me like this? Emotionally? Financially? Ever?" She had no answer. Just silence. And in that silence, everything became crystal clear. Our relationship had been hollow for years. This money hadn't changed anything, it had just dragged all the unspoken truths out into the light. And when she left that day, without another word, I knew they had finally accepted that I wasn't going to cave. The calls slowed down. The texts stopped. At first, it felt like a weight had been lifted, but underneath that relief, there was a heavy, aching disappointment. It stung to realize that my worth to them had always been transactional. So I turned my focus to the people who didn't see me as a wallet. I started spending more time with friends, coworkers, and mentors, people who liked me for me. I began volunteering, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or means for. And I found it healing in a way I didn't expect. Giving back, on my terms, filled a part of me I didn't even know was still empty. It helped me form new connections, build community, and start filling in the emotional gaps left behind by years of feeling like I didn't belong. I also started therapy. For the first time, I had the resources and the space to unpack all of it, years of resentment, betrayal, and being the outsider in my own family. It was hard, but it was necessary. I learned to recognize manipulative behavior, to hold firm boundaries, and most importantly, to value my own needs and peace. One day, I sat down and wrote letters to every family member who had tried to guilt me or pressure me for money. I poured everything out, not just about the inheritance, but about the years of being overlooked, ignored, and used. I didn't expect anyone to respond. I wrote those letters for closure. But to my surprise, one reply came back. It was from my half-brother. He was still just a kid, 14, but his letter was clumsy in the way that only sincere things are. "I'm sorry for asking for money. I miss you," he wrote. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. We started texting a little, small things about school, his favorite games, stuff he liked. It wasn't some dramatic reunion, but it was a start. A flicker of hope that maybe one relationship in that house wasn't completely lost. Update 1. Hey everyone, just wanted to share a quick update since my last post. It's been a few weeks, and to be honest, I wish I could tell you things have gotten better. But the truth? They've gone from bad to full-on train wreck. First off, I want to say thanks. Your support and advice have been a lifeline during all this. Seriously, I don't know how I'd be holding up without it. So here's what's happened. Back in August, after everything blew up with my family, my mom reached out wanting to meet. I already had a pretty good idea that it wasn't just a friendly check-in. So, to play it safe, I suggested we meet somewhere public. I figured it might help keep things calm, or at least keep things from turning into a shouting match. From the moment we sat down, the air was awkward. She started talking about how hard things have been lately, how money's tight, how my stepdad's hours got cut, how my half-brother's private school bills are piling up. She even threw in how desperately she needed a vacation to escape the stress of it all. Not once did she ask how I was doing. How I'd been coping. Nothing. I was just a sounding board for her problems, and the longer she talked, the more uncomfortable I got. Finally, I had to ask, what's the point of all this? And without missing a beat, she said it, she expected me to give her a check for $1 million. Yeah, $1 million. She claimed it was technically her money since it came from her late husband's side of the family. But she was being reasonable by only asking for a third of it. I stared at her, dumbfounded. I didn't even argue. I just quietly paid the bill and got the hell out of there. Since that day, she's been on a full-blown smear campaign, telling anyone who will listen that I stole the inheritance and that it should have been hers all along. My stepdad jumped in too. He sent me this massive wall of text lecturing me about family duty and how I can't just think of myself when I'm part of something bigger. I reminded him, rather pointedly, that he didn't include me in his will because, in his words, I wasn't really family. That shut him up for now. But I doubt it's over. It's been chaos ever since. They've been bad-mouthing me to everyone. Spinning the story so that I'm the villain, the greedy one, the selfish traitor who turned his back on his own. And honestly, I'm scared. I don't know what they're planning next. I feel like they're trying to isolate me to make everyone else see me as the problem. I'm trying to stay grounded, stay rational. But it's hard when the people who are supposed to support you are the very ones trying to tear you down. Anyway, I'll post more updates if anything changes. For now, I'm just trying to protect my peace, keep my head up, and lean on the people who actually care. Thanks again for being here. It's been a wild ride, and honestly, just knowing there are people out there who understand what I'm going through, it means more than I can say. Update 2. Hey folks, just dropping back in with a big update. Buckle up because the past few weeks have been a whirlwind. I've been trying to keep my head above water while everything around me spins out of control. First off, I really appreciate all the advice and support you've been throwing my way. You have no idea how helpful it's been to have a place where I can lay it all out and actually be heard. So thank you sincerely. Alright, here's the latest. Out of nowhere, a few weeks ago, I get this envelope in the mail. Real official looking. Heavy paper, embossed lettering, the whole 9 yards. It's from some law office I've never heard of, and inside is a letter claiming that my mom is suing me. Yep, my own mother. Taking me to court for a chunk of the inheritance. When I first read it, my heart dropped into my stomach. Full on panic mode. I was pacing around the house, thinking of lawyers and courtrooms and headlines about people getting sued by their families. It didn't even feel real. And just when I thought the day couldn't get any worse, I get a text from my stepdad. And not just any text, one of those ominous, borderline threatening messages that makes your skin crawl. You'll regret not sharing your money, he wrote. Now we're going to take you for everything you're worth. I just stared at my phone in disbelief. It honestly felt like I was living in some low-budget soap opera. The evil step-parent plotting revenge? Come on. But the worst part was he wasn't bluffing. Or at least, they were trying really hard to make me believe he wasn't. Still shaken, I forwarded the letter and the text to my attorney. I was expecting a long battle ahead, bracing myself for legal hell. But my lawyer? He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, an actual, full-on, are you serious kind of laugh. He looked at me, tossed the letter aside, and said, don't lose sleep over this. According to him, my grand aunt's will was ironclad. Locked up tighter than Fort Knox. Every detail was laid out clearly. There wasn't a single loophole they could exploit, and since my mom wasn't a legal heir, not even a blood relative, she had zero grounds to challenge anything. But my attorney wasn't done. He decided to dig a little deeper just to be thorough. And sure enough, the so-called law office that sent the letter? Total sham. The address led to some sketchy, abandoned building that looked like it hadn't seen life in a decade. The phone number? Disconnected. No website, no official record. Nothing. Looks like my mom and stepdad got so desperate they either hired some cut-rate, barely qualified lawyer or made the whole thing up entirely, hoping to scare me into giving up some of the money. When I realized it was all just a bluff, I swear I felt something inside me finally release. Like a knot I didn't even know I'd been carrying around had come undone. I was so ready to fight. I'd been preparing for war. And all this time, they were just blowing hot air, hoping I'd cave. So, after that mess deflated, I knew I needed a break. I'd been on edge for weeks, barely sleeping, constantly looking over my shoulder, stressing over what ridiculous move they'd try next. I sat down with a few close friends, vented everything, and we all agreed it was time to get out of town. Nothing fancy. Just a road trip, something simple and freeing. We picked a few spots we'd always talked about visiting but never got around to. No big agenda, just music, long drives, and a chance to breathe. Honestly, I think this is exactly what I need. A little peace, some adventure, a few good laughs. Just being around people who care without expecting anything in return. It's weird thinking back on how all of this started. There was a time when I genuinely looked up to my mom and stepdad. I tried so hard to earn their approval, to feel like I belonged. And now? Now I see it for what it is. It's disappointing, yeah, but it's also eye-opening. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to support you end up being the ones who drag you down. And when that happens, stepping away isn't betrayal, it's survival. So that's where I'm at. Packing a bag, grabbing snacks for the road, and doing my best to shake off the stress. I'll keep you posted if anything else happens on the family front, but honestly, I'm hoping for radio silence. For now, I'm focusing on what matters. Moving forward. Protecting my peace. Reclaiming the joy I've let them steal from me for far too long. And to everyone who's been reading, supporting, messaging, thank you. You've been my anchor through all this chaos. Every comment, every kind word, every hang in there has helped more than you know. Here's to better days. Hopefully my next update is full of fun stories, stupid roadside diners, and zero family drama. Catch you all after the trip.